Hey everyone, today we're going to show you how to convert a 10mm Ultra BMX hub to a 15mm through axle. This may or may not require a through bolt depending on your frame. You're going to need a couple of tools, a 19mm socket, 8mm hex key, a 2.5mm hex key. You'll need a pair of bearing drifts, one for a 60-4 and one for a 17-28-7, a bearing press, and a slide hammer or bearing extractor. To get started, take your 8mm hex key and completely remove the axle bolts from your hub. Once removed, you can set these aside as they will no longer be needed. Next, we'll start with removing the axle assembly. Begin by removing the non-drive side end cap with a firm tug. Locate the pinch bolt on your preload collar and use your 2.5mm hex key to loosen the pinch bolt. Once loose, you can remove the preload collar with a counterclockwise rotation while holding the axle. Next, locate the cross hole in the axle and use your 2.5mm hex key, passing through both ends to hold the axle. Take your 19mm socket and turn counterclockwise to loosen the drive side end cap. Once loose, you can remove this by hand and then give a firm push on the axle to pull out of the non-drive side of the hub. At this stage, you're now ready to remove the driver bearing. Take your bearing extraction tool, install it to the 6902 driver bearing, and while holding the driver and hub firmly, go ahead and remove. You'll notice that we're holding the driver in firmly using the lock ring in your fingers. This will keep the driver from popping out when removing the bearing. Now that your 10mm kit is removed from the hub, let's take a look at the 15mm conversion kit. This kit consists of a drive side end cap, the 17-28-7 driver bearing, the non-drive side end cap, a 20mm preload collar, and the 15mm axle. Be sure you have all these components before you begin. Let's start by installing the 17-28-7 driver bearing. Take your bearing drift, load onto your bearing tool, then present this into the hub from the drive side. Once loaded, take your 6804 bearing drift and use that to center against the non-drive side of the hub. Once fitted, go ahead and tighten your bearing press until the bearing is firmly seated into the driver. You will feel a firm stop when the bearing is fully seated. Go ahead and remove your bearing press, and we can now install the axle into the hub. Now before installing the axle, identify the orientation. The drive side will have a small shoulder, the non-drive side will have threads and an O-ring. Go ahead and install from the non-drive side and give a firm press until seated into the driver bearing. Next, take your drive side end cap. You'll notice the drive side end cap has a flange, where the non-drive side end cap does not. Give that a firm press to the axle, squeeze the hub in the palm of your hands to seat. Next, you'll take your preload collar and loosely thread it onto the hub with a clockwise rotation. Only tighten this preload collar until it just touches the bearing, and then remove it a couple of turns so that you have room for adjustment. Then slide on your non-drive side end cap. Now we're ready to bolt the hub into the frame and adjust the preload once it's compressed. Once you've installed the hub into your frame, be sure to tighten the through axle or through bolt to a riding torque spec. Now take your preload collar, rotate counterclockwise to loosen preload or clockwise to add preload. You want to adjust until the sweet spot where there is no side-to-side play in the hub and it spins freely. Adding too much preload, you'll notice bearing drag. Not enough preload and you'll notice side-to-side play. Once you find the sweet spot, take your 2.5mm hex key, locate the indentation on the brake flange, and tighten until snug. Once you've completed this, the hub is now ready to ride and you're ready to hit the track.